We would all agree that the past few weeks have been like none we've ever experienced before. The coronavirus pandemic is changing everything about how we live. While the coronavirus is a problem, it has also created huge youth ministry opportunities that we can't miss. The fact that our kids are living in fear, anxiety, and uncertainty means that we have an unprecedented opportunity to point them to the grace, mercy, and peace of our burden-bearing Savior, Jesus Christ. Stick with us as I engage in a timely and practical discussion with a group of very thoughtful youth workers as we strategize on how to best navigate this landscape filled with spiritual hunger on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, Jason, we're up to episode 100 of Youth Culture Matters. I can hardly believe it. We started 4 years ago. Our goal was to, every other week, record a podcast, and I think we've more or less accomplished that goal. But as we've been leading up to this, I have been thinking a lot about, what could we do for episode 100? This is not what I expected. I didn't think this would be the avenue we'd go down because at all. We'd be living in these times with a coronavirus. Jason, as always, joining me as a co-host. And because we're going to be talking today about youth ministry and the coronavirus, I just want to ask you, you're up in the Northwest, and it seems that from everything we've been hearing over the last couple of weeks, you guys have really been hit by that rather hard. I know it's everywhere now. What's happening up there in Washington State?
Yeah, I mean, it's just gone from weird to weirder to weird. Again, or weirder. Yeah. Anyways, it's actually been one of these unique things. Last week, it was announced that we were going to be out of school until the end of till the end of April and potentially into May. They're actually contemplating just ending the school year. I know Kansas did that yesterday. So it's getting more and more just isolated. People are having to social distance. Now, if you go outside in certain parks, it doesn't look that way, but it is something that the governor here has taken quite seriously and closed down all restaurants and bars, closed down all the schools, and we're in this probably until the end of April, early May.
Yeah. So this really has changed really the face of life completely. I know for me it has. And it's changed the face of ministry and specifically youth ministry, which is what we want to talk about. We brought some people in to talk about that. But let me ask you first, Jason, how I describe my life right now. If I had to put it in a sentence, it would be I feel like I'm living in a bit of a dark cloud. So, spiritually for me, this kind of hit home for me. So last week I was up in Boston, and I got into my hotel room, and Thursday night I was really looking forward to watching the Philadelphia Flyers, my beloved hockey team, play their game as they were getting ready, I think at that point, to move into first place, and if they had won, obviously. Excited about the baseball season upcoming, which I know you as a Cubs fan, same thing, me as a Phillies fan.
Absolutely.
High hopes. This is our year, right? So I know that there's others who are going to join us here who like teams like the Red Sox and others, but we'll give them a dispensation of grace on that. But that said, I started to think through. I found myself sort of like wandering. You know what I mean? Like just walking around aimlessly. Like, what am I going to do? And that really made me to start to think about, what are all the diversions that I've had in my life that have actually become maybe way too important, if not idols. And I'm still processing that. I think there's a lot of that in my life that just because of the kind of world that we live in, the wonderful things we've been blessed with. And, this is unprecedented. I've said to my kids, none of us have lived through this. In this country here, we have been blessed beyond measure. And we have to remember that there are people who, as we're processing this, that's new to us, they've been living under the threat of this, the constant threat of this, and worse, on a daily basis for their entire lives. And let me just say, it's germane to our conversation today, that those are some of the most incredibly enthusiastic about their faith and deep in their faith people that I've ever met or heard from. So what's it like for you? Are you sensing what I'm sensing personally, or?
I don't know if I would put it in those words. You were thinking about just the older generation. It was interesting. I have a mentor, a friend who's much older than me, and I called and I wanted to check in. Hey, I just want to see if there's anything I can be doing to help. Can we go pick up food for you? And he's actually out. He and his wife are out serving. I mean, they're just like, well, if something happens, something happens. God has been good to us, and I'm getting worried. And I think that's one of the things that's been unique for me is it's made me realize how my actions influence or impact others.
Yeah.
And specifically, I'm thinking of the older generation. I mean, one of the reasons I want to be careful with what we're doing and how we're engaging is because I don't want my family, my parents. We were supposed to be in Arizona. You talked about sports. We were going to go down to spring training and hang out and take in several Cubs games. We the first year ever, I'd been on a waiting list. I got spring training season tickets to the Cubs, and I was just excited to go down, sit in my seats, and all of a sudden everything starts to change. And I had to realize we canceled our trip long before all this was starting to happen, just because we wanted to be careful with getting on a plane, going to see my parents. My grandmother, who's 97. We want to be really careful not to pass this along. And so all of a sudden, I just realized, one, how my actions impact those that are around me. Two, I've also had to question, what are the idols? You mentioned idols. I think a lot about, like, ministry can sometimes be an idol. Sometimes we can make it this thing that's really big. And I've always wondered, is my identity wrapped up in what I do?
Yeah.
Or am I doing this because of a calling or a spurring on that's just much more than something about my identity? And it's been refreshing for me, because it's like, I've had to really look inward and question some stuff, but it's like, okay, this is probably one of the first times where I'm like, I am doing what I'm supposed to do, and if it goes away, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. So I like that you brought identity into it, because that's the big conversation we've had before. I want to let people know that we've got a variety of people who are coming on here. We are actually recording this remotely, so you may hear a little more background noise than normal, and we apologize for that. But this is the podcast world, and we're making it work in today's world. So I want to go. I've asked 3 people to come on here with Jason and myself. Chris is logged on with us as well, as he records and produces this. But I've asked 3 of my friends who I highly respect as very thoughtful youth ministry people. We've had them all on the podcast before. I've asked them to join us because I want to pick their brains a little bit about what some of their concerns are, what they're doing in their youth ministries. I've tracked with them a little bit and know what they're doing is good, and some good recommendations. But I want to ask them all that question I just asked Jason, just about how you're doing with this. I'll start with Chelsea. Chelsea, just introduce yourself, and you're up in the Boston area. Tell us about what you're doing up there. This is Chelsea Erickson.
Yeah, so I work at a church called First Congregational Church of Hamilton, and we're just reeling, I think, like everyone else. I oversee our 6th through 12th grade ministry to our youth, and have a role with our children's ministry as well, and just broadly pastorally in the church too. And it's, like you're both saying, I mean, I just really resonate with kind of the adjustment that's needed right now. I think for me personally, it's sort of felt a little bit like you described, Walt, of just that cloud of disappointment that I think our students are really sitting in and experiencing as well. So personally, I think that's helped me to have some compassion for just their sense of loss of, the school year. I think we haven't moved totally to that direction yet as a state of canceling school for the year, but it's looking like that could happen. And so graduations for our college students and our high schoolers have been just canceled, and there's a lot that comes with that for them in terms of disappointment. And I've felt that personally as well. So I think, sharing a devotion with our students the other day, I'm doing kind of a daily devotional and challenge for them. And I shared from this verse, these verses in 2 Corinthians 1, really the whole thing from 3 to 11. This is the place where Paul talks about the God of all comfort. So that's kind of why I went there. But in verses 8 and following, he talks about the experience that he had in Ephesus, and he's writing to the Corinthian church. And this just jumped off the page at me. He says, "Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death." And then he says, "But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us." So I've just been kind of saying those verses to myself and to my students again and again, that this is our hope, that God will deliver us, that we would not rely on ourselves but on him. And that's a daily struggle for me, even as I try to lead others in it. So I think that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, that's good. Let's go east to west, from the East Coast to the West Coast. We got to stop in Ohio. Kyle Hosmith's with us from Old North Church in Canfield.
Hi, Walt. Good morning.
Yeah. Well, we just had you on the podcast, so we called you back.
Yeah, last episode 99 and now 100.
Yeah, that's great. We're glad you're here. So, Kyle, what's going on with you folks there, and how, personally, how are you guys navigating this? You guys have a fairly new baby in your family as well.
Yeah, so my wife Jenna and I live outside of Youngstown, Ohio. And we have a 5-month-old baby girl named Madeline. And this has been a journey trying to navigate not only as a pastor, but now at home as a husband and a father here in Ohio. So similar to what others have mentioned, all of our restaurants are takeout only right now. I had a lunch meeting yesterday and went with one of our other pastors and interns at the church into Chipotle at 12:30, and it was empty other than one employee who was sitting there eating his lunch. And just the reality setting in that life is different now. Similar to what Chelsea mentioned, our local college, Youngstown State University, canceled graduation, and the school year is looking more and more like, if it happens at all live, it's not going to be much at all. So at the church, I oversee our 5th grade to 12th grade and work with some college students, and we're navigating what this new normal looks like right now. I was sitting here this morning at my desk writing postcard notes to students, and it's just interesting thinking how out of the ordinary this is for us. So we are doing a lot of conversation via Instagram with our students on our private account, and navigating what this looks like now.
Yeah, Kyle, let me give you a virtual pat on the back there. You're writing postcards.
Yes, I'm writing postcards. My assistant, we made postcards for every middle schooler, high schooler, and in the process, college students right now. So hundreds of note cards, and we divided them by our team. And the goal is that each student or each family will get a handwritten note from one of our staff members, and just we are sending text messages. We're going Facebook Live. We're doing all of that, but I don't think they're expecting to get a postcard in the mail.
No, and
so
you may get some text messages. What is this thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
put a tutorial up, because I don't think Jason knows how to address a postcard. So make sure you put that up so he knows how to do that. But I mean, I think that is a brilliant idea, because people just don't do that anymore, and it's that personal touch that's. I waver back and forth. I have no problems with the digital world. The fact that we're able to do this is because of that. It's a wonderful thing, but I just don't want to, trash the analog world, which can be a little more personal and, see, feel, touch, that kind of thing. So that's great you're doing that.
Yeah. So we're navigating well here, and thankful for God's providence in the middle of this unique situation.
Yeah, good. All right, let's jump over to the West Coast. And I understand Kevin Yee's with us. I understand that the normally crowded highways in Southern California fairly empty.
Yes. So, yeah. I actually just read an article this morning about how the CHP is worried about people speeding on the freeways during rush hour, because normally it's like back-to-back traffic, but it's empty, so people are speeding.
And by the way, he mentioned the CHP. That's Chips. Eric Estrada. That's Eric Estrada. For those of you who are older, have no clue what we're talking
Eric
about.
Estrada is deeply concerned.
There's no plot lines for them now because there's no law to enforce on people because they're not out there. But Kevin, tell us where you are and tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, so I'm at Church Every Day, a Korean American church out here in Los Angeles, and it has been pretty crazy. We've all been feeling just the slow trickle out of the news about what's been happening. It started with, honestly, right when Tom Hanks and the NBA Jazz players got the coronavirus, that's when I feel like we felt the seriousness of it all, and it just has been every single day after that, just been really crazy hearing the news. For us as a church, we've been scrambling since last Thursday to really deeply consider what this looks like, to do ministry remotely, to do ministry via video conferencing, to do live streaming, to do pre-recorded online services. And one of the really amazing things that's kind of come out of that for our church, though, is just how seriously we take our worship. And so that's been the main thing that we've been doing, is communicating with our congregation about how we don't want them to not stay connected with us. We're doing everything that we can to do video conferencing with individual people, with our cell group system, with our students, but also just really focusing on helping our families do worship together. And we're in an immigrant church context, so we actually have separate services basically for what we're called departments, from children all the way to college students. And then we have an English ministry, which is English-speaking adults, but then we have the Korean-speaking congregation as well. And so what that means is on any given Sunday, we really don't get to worship together as families because of the language barrier. But interestingly enough, this past Sunday, we basically had all of our families all of our children's ministries, youth ministries basically do an online family worship, because we had to have the kids. They can't set up their own laptops and things like that. And so we got like just hundreds of pictures, because that's how we took attendance for our children, was to have them watch the online worship, but then take pictures of themselves. And it was just so cool how this prayer that we've been praying for so many years about, God, how do we help families to do worship together? Yeah. Even during a time like this, has been strangely just kind of in a really backwards way been answered. And we've just been realizing that, wow, this is something that we hope will transform the culture of our church once we're able to meet again. We don't know when that's going to happen, but just the idea of families being able to sit together, pray together, worship together. We're even building in things like offering time into our online worship services, and having all the families dress up. Don't just do this in your PJs. Treat this as if you were coming to church. And it's been really encouraging to see our church family really rise together.
Yeah, I had one friend say to me that one of his concerns about all this, when this is all over and people come back physically into our buildings and are not just joining us digitally, is that everyone will show up in their pajamas with a cup of coffee and a plate of pancakes. And, I thought about that, and I thought, there could be some legitimacy to that in terms of the way that this is going to nurture us into new habits. And my hope will be that people won't get so comfortable with a virtual church that they will miss out on the actual physical coming together. So, that's important. So, Kevin, I want to come back to you, because part of what we're going to talk about here really goes back to something you posted on Facebook that earlier this week that I thought was absolutely brilliant, because it's a concern I think we should all have as we sort of self-police and look at the beauty of this opportunity in the midst of this problem with the coronavirus, because we really do have a landscape now that is, I think, in the ministry world in general, but certainly in the youth ministry world, because our kids are young, we're trying to deal with their sense of invulnerability. They are, they're dealing with anxiety and fear, which we'll talk about on a later podcast with Ed Welch. But all those things, it's a landscape of opportunity, great spiritual opportunity. And you really helped me boot up on this and reboot on this, I guess, with what you wrote. And I almost hesitate to say, like, what a curmudgeon you are, Kevin. I thought this was great. No, really, this is good. As a young guy, I thought, Kevin, this is perfect. So can I read what you wrote?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
yes.
Here we go. So, and I think this is good because this is going to spark our conversation. So Kevin writes this. I should add all sorts of, extra added inflections here, but I'll just read it straight out. So he says, I don't normally rant or get on a high horse, but I can't help it on this one. So many youth forums I'm in are trying to help youth pastors come up with coronavirus games. Most of them are just lists of things to do that are semi-pointless. I just want to tell them all to stop with the busyness. We have an opportunity to talk about what really matters. We should be helping our students process through disappointment for things that are being canceled. Graduations may not happen for seniors. Performances and things that students have been getting ready for in the fall are now being canceled because productions and tests and etc. are happening in the spring. If this is prolonged, our summer activities are in jeopardy too. Let's be compassionate and kind and available to listen and to pray with our students. That's a good place to start. So, Kevin, I thought that was great. Just comment on that, then we're going to take a break and come back and unpack this a little bit more. But talk about where that came from, because I think we all share this concern, and if we don't, we should.
Yeah, I mean, this comes from really just reaching out to my students, and just hearing stories again and again of just how disappointed they are and the things that they were hoping would happen. I mean, particularly for the seniors. This has been devastating for the seniors, and it's not just graduation, but it's stuff like prom, stuff like there was a bunch of senior activities that were supposed to happen after spring break, because that's really when the school year is ending and schools had all of these things planned, and all of that's being canceled. And for a lot of the students, they were hearing the news initially about this, and it's like they're young, this is not something this virus is not something that's going to affect them so much. And so for them, it just feels like a lot of these freedoms are being restricted, not for something that necessarily should affect them, but for a particular older generation. And so a lot of them have been angry about that. But they know they shouldn't be. They know they shouldn't be bitter and angry about the fact that they have to help protect older people or people who are more vulnerable to the virus. And so it's like they're wrestling with just a ton of emotions and feelings. On one hand, they're not sure if it's right to feel guilty and not to feel angry about these kinds of things. And so they feel a little guilty about that. But at the same time, like, I think it's very, very complicated right now. And they're not sure when this is what's going to happen, in terms of if we don't graduate, is there any sort of celebration that we're able to do? Are we going to be in a situation where it's like what we're reading about in Italy or in Asia, where, people are at home and really stuck for, 2-3 months, and they're just dreading all of that. And I just feel like at some point, it's important for us to recognize that boredom is a concern. But at the same time, I think primarily as youth workers, we need to do everything we can to listen and to hear our students and to just be there for them and to let them know that we are an available resource, to hear them out, to be a landing place for their concerns, for their frustrations, for us to want to pray with them. I think this season, just in the last couple of days, has been the richest with regards to personally praying for students. And that has been such an encouragement to me and has been an encouragement to others. We've had video conferences over the last couple of days where students have been praying for each other, and just giving them space to also minister to each other as well. And I just think that, as youth workers, this is such an incredible opportunity for us, I think, to really help our students to recognize, as you were talking about earlier, like, what have their idols been, and to be at that landing place for them as they see their idols sort of crumbling, and to point them towards something far better, and to point them towards Christ, to point them towards a community that's there for them. And I just love, Kyle, what you're doing and just sort of sending them postcards and stuff. Like, that is the beauty of the church and what we can do to help support students at this time. And again, I mean, this is it's pretty early, and, you know, a lot of the disappointment hasn't even quite settled in yet.
Yeah.
And it's coming, and it's going to get worse. And so I think for us to prayerfully consider how we become like Christ to them, to show them grace and compassion, I think that's going to be super important.
Yeah, that's really good, Kevin. I'm almost tempted to say podcast over, but I do want to, because that was good what you said there, and some great challenges. You covered so much. I just took some notes. You know, listen and pray to our students, because we've got to understand what their fears are. But here's one thing: I was thinking as you're talking there, the rug that is sort of the anesthetic of normalcy, which has been pulled out from under us, is making us think about things that I really believe we've never thought about before, that we have to think about. Practically, ministry-wise, theologically, relationally, generationally, and we're going to come back after a break and we'll talk about those things, so stick with us. Here at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, we want to help you stay up to date on today's youth culture. One of the tools we've developed to keep you current is our weekly Youth Culture e-update. Delivered to you by email, our Youth Culture e-update comes to you in a format that allows you to easily scroll through and quickly choose those stories and resources that will be most helpful to you in your particular setting. To sign up for this free resource, go to our website at cpyu.org, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and enter your email address in the tab marked e-update sign up. It's that simple.
Thanks again for joining us for Youth Culture Matters. Sitting here with Walt, social distancing, talking about the current COVID-19 issue that's affecting all of our youth ministries. Walt, I know you had something, before we go back to some of our other guests, you had something that you just recently wrote. Maybe share a little bit of that before we dive into some particular questions for each of our guests.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how this shutdown, you know, I referred to how I was kind of pacing in the house, like, what do I do now, you know? And then I thought to myself, I've got tremendous amounts of time here where these normal diversions are gone for the most part, and I'm having to face up to my idols in terms of how I spend my time and the things I rely on, and as you said earlier, Jason, that we might and our students might find their identity in. But I just penned this, and by the way, when I put things like this up, people need to understand, this is journaling for me. I'm writing to myself here. So I wrote this. I said, with many of our regular diversions shut down, the temptation will be to spend the next few weeks running to our other diversions, specifically the triple screens, smartphones, TV, computers, and social media, thereby only increasing our growing addiction to each. That's not a good thing. Is it possible that what we miss dearly are things that we hold to dearly? Is this an indicator that we've embraced these things as idols? What would happen if we would use this great gift of time to seek times of fellowship with the Lord, to read, to study, and to engage face-to-face with others? And for many of us, for many of our students, that's walking into the unfamiliar and sometimes difficult territory of family relationships, as we try to do that, because we're not used to that. Then I wrote, I'll just finish that. Is it possible that the way we choose to use our time over the coming days and weeks would refresh us and lead us into becoming more and more the people we've been created to be? I'm just thinking about this. So
yeah. Actually, that reminds me of even something that you and I talked about when this was first happening, and we had a conversation on the phone. And there was even this aspect of it, almost in the midst of the cloud, there's also this aspect of being able to take a moment and breathe deep, because we're able to prioritize what are we going to do. And it's that opportunity to get off the hamster wheel for a moment and actually focus on the things that we most appreciate and love, and maybe step away from some of the craziness of the schedule, because the schedule all of a sudden is flipped on its head, and we're getting a chance to kind of redo. And that was something that you and I had talked about on the phone. And so I hear that a little bit in what you're sharing.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes you focus on what's really important. And that's where I want to lead the discussion now,
Yes.
because you folks who are doing, boots on the ground youth ministry with students, you've had to readjust here your approach to students, your communication avenues with students. But here's what I want to hear about. What are the spiritual issues? And Kevin's mentioned a few of them, but specifically, what are some of the spiritual issues that have been raised for you that you see this coronavirus providing us with an opportunity to address? Because it's bringing these things to the forefront, not only with the questions students have, but the needs we anticipate, we know they'll have as life changes for them and begins to unfold in new ways. Are there specific, and I'm going to use the word, are there specific doctrines from the scriptures that you believe we need to run to now, bury ourselves in just for our own spiritual growth and development, and then also, hit our kids with to make sure that they're deeply rooted? Anybody?
This is connected to that, Walt, but I was just thinking as you and Jason were talking, and as you read that, what you've written about the devices, I think that was my first thought as everything started to close was, wow, this is a moment when our kids, they need us to coach them in how to use their time now. They need us to coach them in how to press into time with the Lord, because it's so easy when everything else has been taken away for them just to spend their days playing video games or scrolling social media or, without a lot of intentionality around their time. So I think that's one thing that's been a theme for me is just how could we, and I'll share a personal story. I had surgery in the fall and was laid up for several weeks. My mom was with me the first week, so it was really easy. I was hanging out with her. But as she started to prepare to leave, I was like, oh no, what am I going to do with myself? I had books to read and shows I wanted to watch and a talk to prepare, but I was kind of nervous about that time. And she actually wrote out for me a schedule. Here's what you can do each day to kind of structure your time. And it was so helpful. It just freed me to feel like, okay, I don't have to panic about this time alone. I have some constructive things I can do, time with the Lord, time to connect with other people. So that's been kind of an image in my mind is how do we, parents and youth workers, do that for kids, maybe to help them press into some of those more deeper doctrinal, theological kind of thoughts that you're talking about. But first, I think they just need the structure to know, okay, I don't have school, I don't have sports, I'm not able to go out with my friends, I don't have youth group. How can I use this time and allow God to redeem it?
Yeah.
And something on my mind.
That's good. And let's not assume that parents have a handle on all these things as well. Part of our ministry opportunity right now is to parents to maybe educate them and help them lean in on these things and give them some resources, which would be really helpful to them.
Absolutely.
During this time of, interacting with their kids and guiding, leading, and nurturing them. Kevin, what do you have?
I think one of the things that I've been thinking deeply about is actually sanctification. Our families, particularly moms and dads who were working outside of the house and now have to either telecommute from work or are possibly in a position where they might not be able to work. And then you have their children who aren't at school anymore, and everyone's inside the house. For a lot of families, they're just not in the house for that many hours together, unless you're homeschooling. But now, guess what? Everyone's homeschooling now, right? We're all instant homeschoolers. And so I've been thinking a lot about how we are all going to be going through a really deep process of sanctification as we are relearning, I think, how to be family units. I can only imagine for a lot of my students just how difficult that is and how difficult it's going to be as they spend more time with their parents. And I think kind of relearn what it means to give one another space. They're going to have to grow in patience. They're going to have to grow in grace. They're going to have to grow in compassion. They're going to have to grow in love. I mean, all of these things that, we read about in the Bible, like this is the fruit of the Spirit. And we read about these things and we memorize these things. But in regards to like the Lord actually using this time to grow that in us is going to be incredibly painful, because you're just going to be more aware of how impatient you are and just how unkind you are sometimes. And I think that it's an opportunity for us to talk about how, yes, this stuff is painful, but at the same time, this is one of just the small ways that God can redeem this time, is by teaching us what it means to spend all of this time with people who really truly know us, and yet at the same time, supporting our students in that there's a lot here to be learned. There's a lot here to be gained. And again, praying with our students through that as well, because this is a work that only God can do. But again, the Holy Spirit that lives in us kind of is convicting us of our sin. And yet at the same time, the gospel also shows us and teaches us that there's an incredible amount of grace and kindness that the Lord has towards us.
That's really good. And I am just thinking here, Kevin, you're admitting you're getting on your wife's nerves, so I like that. That's good.
Yeah,
we're
it's
all
only
in
been
it.
like day 3, so
Yeah, we would all raise our hands to that, right, with our spouses, and then you throw kids into the mix, and it just is. But you're right; these are good lessons, and you know, if this is if it's the relational tension that is the extent of our suffering through this, that's relatively speaking, that's not much, but we have to deal with it. We just haven't been trained well. So that's a good word, Kevin. Jason, you were going to say something.
Well, I appreciate what Kevin said, and I think Chelsea brought up the idea of structure. Like, what are we doing? And I think the thing that I'm hearing from you, and I would love for each of you or for Kyle to dive into this, it's not just the kids that we're trying to help bring structure. It almost feels like we have a responsibility as well to the parents to be able to help them create some structure, to help them have some tools for some of that dialogue, to maybe discuss some of that tension, to maybe do the very thing that some of our teens have not done. So maybe, Kevin, if you could maybe share a little bit about that, or thoughts on that if you have any, and then maybe if Kyle and Chelsea have anything.
Yeah, I think because, again, the whole instant homeschooler thing, we know that parents aren't prepared for this either. It's not just the students who are dealing with disappointment, but parents also. And so how do we help them with their time? For sure. We've just been brainstorming lots and lots of things, but actually we're going the snail mail route too, especially with our children's ministries, because on Sundays we do crafts and things like that. And so our pastors and our leaders have been preparing these gigantic packets, manila envelopes filled with, we're not calling it homework, it's crafts. So it's different. But we're sending that home, and what we're going to try to do is record some videos about like how to put that stuff together. It's more fun. You can talk about the Bible lesson as you put that together. So we're actually now giving them like family discipleship opportunities, and that should take about 30 minutes to an hour a week. And we know that we got to do more in that sense. And we know we have to do more via video. But again, so many of our ministries are not prepared for that. And so we're just scrambling to try to figure out how we do that well.
Yeah, Kevin, I relate to what you're thinking through here. Something you said earlier, too, is these are things that we always want our parents to be doing with their children. And now we have a golden opportunity to help equip them in this unique season. One thing we are doing is on Saturday night, we're sending an email to all the parents of high school, middle school, and elementary students that we're calling a family ministry guide that will go along with the Sunday morning sermon. So usually on a normal youth group night, I would send my small group leaders questions to discuss with the students. Well, now the questions are going directly to the parents. So after they watch the sermon on Sunday morning, they can sit with their students and ask questions that are based on the sermon, but targeted directly to middle school and high school students. The other thing we're doing, which reminded me when you were just saying about sending stuff out, is we're trying to send 2 to 3 resources on this family ministry guide of videos that parents can either recommend their students to watch or watch with their students about different things such as biblical topics, biblical doctrines, archaeology, just anything that can fill the void of all this time that these students have together. So it is interesting how, although none of us would wish this upon our churches, it's giving us a time to equip parents in this unique season.
That's good. I'll throw one thing in, shameless self-promotion. This is what we do at CPYU, but our parent page is a resource that people can use. I wasn't going to mention this. Jason's laughing. I wasn't going to mention this to you guys, mention this because that's a resource you can get in the hands of parents that will help them understand some of what's happening in the youth culture. And I'll just throw this in. As we're recording this, folks who are listening to this, through your podcast player, wherever you get your podcasts, we are recording while we're live on Facebook Live. And Chad Fickett asks, do you recommend any online sites for youth leaders to help resource them to keep connected to their students? And I'll throw this out, all right, because we found this to work well for us. So many of the social media platforms, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but many of the social media platforms that kids are using right now tend to involve and encourage interaction that's fast, all right? It's short and it's fast. And this is where I think if we can go back to and call our kids back to a place like Facebook, which would serve us well with this, set up a private Facebook group for your students, for youth ministry. I mean, here at CPYU, we have a reading group that's on there that's private. We have almost 600 people in there reading books together. We have a site called CPYU, a Facebook group called CPYU Together in the Word, where we have over 100 people who are reading through Tim Keller's devotional, and every day we post something on there. We can interact as we choose or choose not to, but just a place where it's a virtual room. And I think there with Facebook, and maybe you guys can recommend some other social media sites, but one of the beautiful things about that is the privacy, inviting people in, and you can put a lot of stuff in there. And it's really not limited by length of time or text.
Yeah,
Well,
in a
since you're
similar
saying that-
way. Oh, go ahead, Chelsea.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to make another shameless plug for you, Walt, as you're talking about that. We're developing a resource page for parents. And I was just thinking about your 3D guide. I mean, this is a perfect time for families as they're watching movies together or listening to music to be engaging in some of that cultural analysis that I think that guide does so well. So I don't know if there's a way to access that online or if you have to order it, but
yeah, we've got
that would
it.
be a really cool thing for families.
Yeah. Kyle, before you chime in here, I'm just going to, because I saw Chris writing this down, and when Chris posts this podcast, I know many of you will access this through your podcast players, but if you come back to our cpyu.org homepage and click on the player for this particular episode 100, down beneath there, Chris lists and links to everything that we mention here. So just come there and look at that. We'll include links to these resources from CPYU that are being mentioned. Anybody else some ideas there?
Yeah, on your recommendation about Facebook, Walt, I found that for our students, when we use our Instagram page, we have our high school ministry has an Instagram page, which is now private, so I can control who's in and who's out. But one of the tools that I like on it is we can ask questions where the students respond, and that response doesn't go public until we allow it to go public. So, for instance, the other day it was Monday, I believe, when everything was settling in around here, the restaurants were closed, things were getting pretty gloom around here. I asked a question, what biblical verses or topics would you like us to discuss in the coming days?
Well, that's
and I
good.
got 4 responses. I got one response, what does the Bible say about boredom, which is funny, but reality. The second response was about anxiety. The third response was about how to help other people in the midst of the storm that we're in. And then the fourth response, which I think was most encouraging to me, was how can we stay involved even though we can't meet together at a church building? And, there's so many, as we talk about, and as you talk about a lot, Walt, the negative aspects of technology. I'm really encouraged in this season to see how we can communicate with students and then best meet their needs through resources like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's not demonize technology because it's giving us an ability to stay connected that for generations prior would not have had. We would have been, stuck behind a wall somewhere wondering if the neighbor's even alive. So the ability to communicate here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, this generation has been, this iGen or Gen Z, whatever you want to call it, has been noted for their desire to be good neighbors. That's kind of a tagline I hear a lot from students, like, how is the church being, how are we in the church being good neighbors? So I think that's a really exciting question to be engaging with kids right now. And we have an opportunity, going back to your doctrinal point, Walt, to say to them, we have a God who does not, although we do, in order to be good neighbors, we have to participate in social distancing right now for the reasons Jason mentioned earlier. We have a God who does not participate in social distancing. He has come near to us in Jesus. And so to talk with them about the incarnation and to say, how can we continue to model that? How can we join Christ in what he's done while observing the social distancing, right? So one of the things we've asked our kids to do in kind of a daily challenge is to write to some of the older members of our church who might be isolated, who might be anxious that this virus is targeting them specifically. So trying to make those connections, not face to face at the moment, sadly, but maybe to strike up a relationship via writing. So we've asked them to write, hey, could you write to this specific person who needs some encouragement?
Yeah.
Maybe they can do that with their physical neighbors as well.
Yeah. I love that. We're living that right now in our family. My dad, both my parents, like 88 and 85, and my dad has been, he struggled a lot with some physical issues, and on Saturday night was admitted to the hospital. I got my mom up there. He was taken by ambulance. And I don't have to go in all this up with him, but we thought we might lose him over the weekend. It was really tenuous, and I got my mom up there on Saturday. That was the last she's seen him, Saturday. So she's not allowed in the hospital, and none of us are allowed in the hospital. So he's up there alone. She's now in her apartment in a retirement community, and they instituted rules this morning that nobody's allowed to come in and see her. So she's alone, but mail delivery is still going, and I think the ability we have to do that and to use our phones. These people, we need to understand they don't text. If they do, that's an anomaly. Go ahead and text them if you know a senior citizen who texts. But go ahead and give them a call and just check in on them, because the loneliness factor has got to be over the top, and we just don't know. And you add to that, Chelsea, as you said, the fear factor. Is this going to hit me? Yeah, they're a vulnerable population. Jason, did you want to chime in there?
Well, I'm just curious on there were some rhythms that have been addressed, but I'm just really curious when it comes to youth group, what you did this last week. I know that, Chelsea, you mentioned you do a daily devotional. And I just want to hear some of the other ways that you're engaging your youth using technology. I know that we've talked about postcards, but I'm just, if we hone in just maybe on the actual youth group, when you would gather, what did it look like this week?
Yeah. Hey, and I'm going to interrupt you there, Jason, because that is a phenomenal question. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to jump into that. Yeah.
Let's do that.
Someone once told me that readers are leaders and leaders are readers. I'm convinced that one of the most important disciplines for youth workers and parents is reading. I've also found that reading and discussing books together has helped me not only stay on a reading schedule, but to consider things that I might not have noticed on my own. That said, I want to invite you to join a reading community where together we read noteworthy and provocative books on important matters related to faith and culture. Our CPYU Reading and Discussion Group can be found on Facebook. Almost 500 people are a part of the group, and we'd love to have you join us. We read and discuss one book every 2 months. Just search on Facebook for the CPYU Reading Discussion Group and then request to join. I'd love to have you join us.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We're going to dive deep into just practices that happened this last week with regards to several youth ministries. Right before the break, I asked a question surrounding that. So I would hand it over to one of the three of you. What beyond, or maybe even explain further, Chelsea, like the daily devotional. So maybe we just start with you. You did the daily devotional, but also what did youth group look like this week?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I was just feeling this burden for we got to help kids know how to use their time in a way that would honor God, that would be edifying for them and for their families, for their neighbors. So we've just issued this daily challenge. I'm doing it on Instagram Live. I'm trying to figure out a way to make it also go to Facebook. I guess there's a platform. Maybe I need to ask Kevin or Chris for help with this. There's a platform, I think, that does both for our non-Instagram users. But just a quick devotional thought, and then something constructive that they can do that day to either spend more time with God on their own, to get outside in his creation, to love their neighbors, or even to be creative. Andy Crouch had a great article about, well, a lot of things about how Christian leaders can lead in this time. And that was one of the things he said, was to be encouraging people to be creative. So that's just been one thing we're doing every day. This past week, I honestly have just been trying to get organized. So we did not have youth group, and I'm waiting for Kevin to publish some more resources about how I can do it on Zoom, because he's my Zoom guru friend. I feel a little anxious about trying to get that up and running. So I think our plan is to kind of launch some kind of online Zoom call, at least for our high schoolers, and then maybe for our middle schoolers, just in their individual small groups, to pray together, to go through some scripture, and just to keep that connection. But we have not started that yet.
Yeah, and let me just throw this in. We were talking during the break, Kevin, if you come up with a tutorial on that or something, if you're willing to send us a link to that, we'll get that out there so youth workers can access that. Yeah, because if everybody's like me, we need tutorials.
Me too, Walt.
That's definitely been something I've been just neck deep in, is just Zoom meetings. My butt has never been flatter just being in this chair, and like, no joke, 6 hours yesterday on different Zoom calls with different people. Well, don't say anything about me.
I got 1,000 things going through my mind right now.
I walked right into that.
Yeah, you did. Softball.
Yeah, no, but I will say this. So I have youth leaders who vary in ages, from college students all the way to like parents of youth students. And they were all terrified that we were going to be doing online small groups. So what we did this past Sunday was we had a pre-recorded like Sunday worship experience. And then we asked our small group leaders to basically in a group chat with your students, in the group chat you already have, like, find a time between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., which was when we would normally be meeting, to see if we can do a virtual version of our Sunday small group meeting. And the reason why we wanted to keep that time was because, again, we don't know when we're going to be coming out of this, but to try to keep the rhythms of our meeting times is going to be, I think, consistency is key, right, in the long run. And so our teachers were, our small group leaders were just terrified, like, how's this going to work? What kind of technology am I going to use? So we had a variety of different things. We had people on Google Hangouts. We had people just old school, like, three-way calling students. We had people using Zoom for the first time. And the feedback was 100%. No one said anything negative other than students that they couldn't particularly reach. But everyone that was able to have the video group basically said, like, this is the world they live in. Like, we are entering into their world in a way that we've never really entered in before. And it was really, really a learning experience for everybody. And what we found and what we've discovered is that in this particular setting with a video conference or some sort of video chat, the students were more focused than they were on a normal Sunday, which is slightly discouraging, but also encouraging to know that we can do ministry during this time. And our small group leaders were all like, I can't wait to do this again. And so again, we're working on, how can we schedule more times like this? How can we schedule online prayer meetings? That's actually been something I've been actively trying to pursue. And because on a video call, you can't just have people like praying all over the place. What we've done is we've had people share prayer requests, and then whoever's hosting that meeting will just assign other people to pray for those people. And our ministry has just never been more encouraged at this time by one another. And so that's been something that, again, I just find to be beautiful about this whole situation, and one of the ways that God's been redeeming this for our community.
You know what's going to be neat is when this is all over, for groups like yours, Kevin, Kyle, I know you're doing this, Chelsea, you're doing this, and others who are meeting virtually. They're in a point now where they're missing the flesh and blood connections they had. So when they come out of this, as they build their relationships through this, when they come out of this, will they appreciate, at least for a time, I hope, and maybe for a long time, I pray, the flesh and blood, and really, really embrace what it is they've been made for by God in terms of relationships with each other in the body of Christ. That's probably a prayer we should be praying.
Okay.
What other things? So, let's just fire off some practical ideas here as you've thought of them. I've got a little list of my own. I'm sure yours are much better than mine, but what do you have?
I will say, as a resource, Ligonier.org has basically released all of their teaching online for free during this time.
Oh yeah,
and so I have a plan to actually do an online Bible study with our seniors. I think they can handle the stuff that's on Ligonier for sure, and with our college and young adult students, and kind of open that up to other students potentially down the line. Again, depending on how long this goes, but they have a platform that will allow us to basically watch videos together. And then have a discussion afterwards.
Hey, and Kevin, you said something there I'm going to respond to, and that is you said your seniors can handle this, and I think we undersell the intellectual capacities and abilities of our kids to go deep on all things, including Christian spirituality, theology, and such. And this is a great time to offer them resources that really respect them and their intellectual capacities, that they can engage with and become interested in, and that will take them deeper. So youth workers, please don't shield them from deep resources. Give them the opportunity to go after those things, because I think we've bought a lie that's led us to dumb down way too much in terms of our communication with our students. Other ideas?
Yeah, another platform similar to what Kevin just shared is one of our pastors one of the pastors at my church who I work with has 3 high school students, and he is having them work through one of the courses on the Gospel Coalition's website on what is the gospel. And there's last time I checked, pretty many courses on that platform, on the Gospel Coalition's website, that, similar to what Kevin said, are made not with students in mind, but that students can take advantage of right now and think through. Another resource which I appreciate a lot is the apologist Sean McDowell has a lot of videos that are about 4 to 6 minutes each that cover different topics and questions that students are asking. And I'm looking forward to taking advantage of this in the upcoming weeks with students.
Yeah. Hey, let me throw another one in, all right? I'm going to jump in between you guys, because I'm seeing here on Facebook Live my old friend Mark Dalby's on. And Mark, it's good to see your name there. Mark Dalby's the president of Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, and that gives me the thought that maybe as youth workers we should check some of the websites from some of our trusted, sound seminaries to see what kinds of things they're putting up or they already have up in terms of videos, maybe even e-courses, the types of things that we could point kids and parents towards as well. These are great. This is just a good stewardship of the extra time we've been given. Yeah, so check out the seminaries. Covenant Seminary, Gordon Conwell. I'm sure Southern has some things. You folks may know some other places as well. But just scan those places to see what's out there.
One other thing for families that I think could be really helpful is the New City Catechism.
Yeah.
They've just released a new resource that goes along with that, and they've got now, I think, video stuff to go along with that. And so that can be something that, again, we don't know how long it's going to be like this, but if you tackled one question a day with your kids and just all throughout the day kind of repeated the catechism, that could be really helpful by the time this is all over.
That's great. I hadn't even heard about that. That's awesome. I know that's something that we've given as resources to parents before, so knowing that there's videos, that's really good. I do have this one question, because I want to continue to talk about resources, but I am curious. I know we're really new in this, and maybe this is going to be something that you have to fire back and we can add to the notes later. But what are you, in the midst of this, is there anything that you've processed and you're like, we're not going to do that again when we start meeting again? Is there anything that you've already said that we're going to throw out? Or there might be something that we're going to throw in. I know that you've mentioned some of the connection that's happening, and so maybe that will become a practice once you start gathering in groups again. But is there anything, or is it too soon to say, oh, we're going to throw this out, or we're going to keep this?
Love that question. That's good. Jason, episode 100, that is the best question you've ever asked.
Excellent. I was saving it for 100.
I was actually just filling the dead air there. You've asked many good questions, but that's a good one. I like that. They're thinking.
Jason, and I don't have anything yet that I'm going to throw out, but I think one thing that I realize that we do need to teach on that I think is overlooked a lot is just the doctrine of the church to students, and why do we meet, and what should this look like? Because all of a sudden, when we are not meeting, the students are feeling this. But this is like a really good time where when you pull something away, before you put it back in, we can teach not only what we do, but what I think is more important, why we meet as the church. And these are conversations that we have with seniors every year before they graduate. But I'm realizing that there's no need to wait till they're seniors to have this conversation about the church. Let's talk about it when they're younger. So
I totally agree with that, Kyle. I think when we so we're usually pretty low tech. Walt is familiar with my church. It's 306 years old and very traditional in a lot of ways still. And so this whole virtual live stream service, is just so new and so outside the box for us, probably more than some other churches. And we did it this last Sunday, but right away I was like, man, I want our parents to know how to kind of field questions from kids about why we don't do this all the time. Why we can't just have church in our PJs every Sunday, why do we gather as the church? So I think that is a really important question, not only to be answering to students and talking with them about, but also to equip parents. How do you answer, why through the centuries has the church met as a physical body? So, part of the answer, at least I think, is the incarnation again, and the theology of the body, that we're embodied people, that God has created us that way. And so it's important to gather. And I think, like you said, Walt, students will have a new appreciation for that, as we all will, when this is all over and we can come back together. But important to be talking about.
Jason, do you feel like you're getting an answer to your question?
Well, it might be too soon. What I know is that this is something that is a work in process, right? Yeah. Like everyone is being thrown into something that they weren't prepared for. But in many ways, what's cool is I hear the innovation. I also hear this is a great opportunity just to go deep. And so that's what I'm absolutely just loving hearing in the midst of this. But I'm also I am just really curious. Are there practices or things that we have either failed to do or that we're able to just remove because it just gets in the way? So, and it sounds like we might be a little bit too soon in that process.
Yeah.
But it does seem like there's some new practices and some things that we're going to, because I love what Kyle was mentioning, just the dynamic or the dynamic, the importance of the doctrine of the church. Like, why is that something that our youth need to know, and not just maybe even as seniors, but gosh, long before, so that they're practicing those very things before they ever step outside of the church they grew up in.
Yeah.
So I love hearing that.
Yeah, I think we probably, for the sake of time, need to start winding down. Yeah. You give me a heads up on that, Chris? Are we doing good on time? I'm asking you because I'm not watching the clock here, but let's just rapid fire here. But let me give you some publishers. Somebody mentioned, I think Kevin, you mentioned Ligoniers putting stuff up. Somebody just texted me who's listening on Facebook Live and said, you probably already know this. I actually don't, but I'm told Crossway Publishing has made a lot of stuff available online, and I'm telling you, the more people do this, the more other people are going to do this. So two things. Youth workers, take advantage of these things for self-education and communicate them to your kids, get your kids involved with them. But as more and more as these things go up, this is where we're going to have to become careful, and we're going to have to tread carefully and vet these things prior to passing them on to kids, because we want to be sure we're sending them to things that will really build them up in good ways that are honorable and glorifying to God and are accurate, biblically and theologically. rather than stuff that's going to undo them in the long run. So vet these things. I was going to say this, and this is a little pat on the back to Kevin because I know he's done this. We've talked about this, but you actually have your students at times read books together. And what a great opportunity you have now for that. Since they have time, let's push them away from just, now I'm going to spend 12 hours a day looking at my screens rather than, the 5 or 6 that I was looking at screens before when I was involved in school and other things. Let's get them away from their screens and let's read together and talk about what we're reading. So look for some good books. A daily devotional book would be great. I'll throw out there as well to post as some of you folks have done, and I've seen many others, a daily 2, 3, 4, 5-minute connection with your students with a video devotional. I know a lot of folks are doing that. I think I mentioned earlier journaling. Get your kids to use this time now to learn how to journal and document what they're thinking and what they're learning. And then the last thing that I would throw out there that I'm thinking about doctrinally, and I harp on this all the time, is teaching a theology of suffering and the growth that comes through suffering. Because this is the kind of world we're entering into now. We've been lulled to sleep here. I read a quote from Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon, this morning, and pass these things on. These quotes that you find as you're being encouraged and you're learning with the extra time you have to read and jump into the scriptures, pass that on, those little nuggets. Those are so helpful, not just for students, but for adults as well. Spurgeon wrote, "This valley of tears is simply the pathway to a better place. This world of woe is but a stepping stone to a world of blessedness." So it's not just a theology of suffering, but it's moving them out of that cultural captivity we have of just living in the here and now, with no sense of the past and no forward-looking with hope to the future. We just live in the now and for the now. And if we're just living in the now, this is devastating, what we're going through. But if we look at history and we see God's faithfulness and God's providence, His provision in history, and we look ahead to that, blessed hope that we all have, and we live towards that, that's a wonderful thing. Any other ideas you want to fire out, folks, in the last couple of minutes we have?
Real quick, I'd love to mention two books and then a website I have to plug for Rooted Ministry. We're actually gearing up to kind of revamp our YouTube channel as well, and so we're going to start pumping out some really good video content. Our founder, Cameron Cole's written an amazing book on suffering. Therefore, I Have Hope. Recently translated into Spanish, just found out. So for all our Hispanic listeners, Spanish resource for you. But I actually think that this is also a great opportunity to talk about heaven, Walt, as you're talking about. And so I think Randy Alcorn's material on heaven is excellent. And I think that that's going to be some really good reading material. And just to throw it out there, like, how do we do this? What if students just got together for 30 minutes a day on a video call and just read out loud the books together? So that's one of the things that we're planning on doing, is passing the time, but then also keeping everyone accountable for actually doing the reading.
Yeah. Now, look, two things I'm going to throw into that. Cameron's book is great, and we'll include a link to a podcast we did with Cameron several episodes back where we actually talked about that. It was a great conversation. Here's another book. I'm going to throw this to youth workers, all right? Because I'm reading this right now, and it's really rocking me. It's the second time I've read it, and I'm really pacing myself through it slowly. And that's an old Puritan text by Richard Baxter called The Reformed Pastor. And don't let the title scare you. It's not, for those of you who are not reformed in your theology, that's not what this is. Baxter was writing in a time when the clergy in his immediate situation had lost their edge. They were not studying. They weren't preaching, teaching with power. They were into all sorts of diversionary things. And Baxter looked around and he said, we have to reform the people involved in our vocational calling, the clergy. And so this is all about what it means to tend to yourself, to reform your ministries, and what it means to tend to your students, to reform your ministry to them and see the Holy Spirit really do some amazing work in their lives. So I can't recommend that enough. And, if this thing goes on, maybe I'll start a little Facebook group on that. We'll get some youth workers reading through the Reformed Pastor. Anything else, guys? Yeah.
2 books I would recommend that if parents don't have them to hand to their kids, they can order on Amazon, even though it might be a little delayed right now, is Crossway published in their 9 Mark series. A pastor named Greg Gilbert wrote a book, What is the Gospel and Who is Jesus? And part of the reason I love these 2 books is they're pretty short books that students can read in a matter of days. I mean, some kids could read it in one day, but they cover 2 of the most important topics, the gospel and Jesus. And as Kevin was mentioning, having kids reading together, I wonder what it could look like in this setting where parents and kids are stuck in houses together, for mom and dad to read a book and their kids to read a book and just discuss it, where usually I think these types of conversations sound like good ideas, but we lack finding time to execute that. All of a sudden we have the time for this. This is not something that's unrealistic right now. So those are two resources I would add to the list.
Chelsea, you got anything resource-wise?
Well, as I was listening to y'all talk about that, and I really agree. I think that would be so cool to do a book club, an at-home book club. One book that has been on my mind a lot this year is J-Curve by Paul Miller. I don't know if you guys have seen this.
Yeah. I just heard Paul speak at an RYM youth leaders training.
Yeah, I mean, it is excellent. And it's really digestible in the sense that it's these short chapters. He gives really clear illustrations. I've just been finding it personally helpful for my own life and for ministry to others. So that might be something, he's really talking about the way we die and then rise with Jesus in the everyday mundane circumstances of our lives. And I think that's a really palpable kind of experience right now. He's trying to show how union with Christ helps us to navigate through that and experience it with him and in him. I think that would be a great theme for families or youth groups to press into together right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we haven't talked yet about the realities of if this thing goes extreme, all right, beyond what any of us imagine. One of the conversations we are going to have and our kids are going to ask us about is death. And I think we need to be prepared to talk about that as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Chelsea. I'll recommend a book just from that, and that is my pastor, who recently retired, who's a dear friend, had a series of his sermons that were just brilliant sermons he preached several years ago, published by Crossway in a book. This is by Michael Allen Rogers. The book is called What Happens After I Die. And parents, this is one I think it would be very worthwhile for you to read. It's very practical. It's straightforward. It's just a wonderful book, and you could teach from this. This would prepare you for these conversations, because even as Kevin mentioned Randy Alcorn's book, Heaven, we got whacked out ideas that I don't know where we picked up on these about what heaven is. And, man, when you read the scriptures, it is something so much better than what we imagine, and much, much different than what we imagine. And Randy Alcorn's book is good on that. Anybody else? Jason, any parting words? I'm gonna say we got to cut this off, but do you have any more good words for us here?
I don't have a book for everyone, and I don't want to add to the noise. The only thing that circles through my head, though, is the Lord's Prayer, and it does, that comes out of the it's something that during this time, something I learned in a book a long time back called The Divine Conspiracy. It was by Dallas Willard, and he broke it down phrase by phrase. And I just think it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to go back and each day, our Father who art in heaven, like just to think all day on that, like what does that mean, and go phrase by phrase by phrase. And I don't know, it's really refreshing. I haven't done that in a long time. It's something that I always pray before I speak or I share. It helps me set myself in the right frame of mind. But I am just in a season where I think this is a great time to just really think about what each of those phrases mean. What was Jesus saying in that? And so that you could read Divine Conspiracy. It's a great book, but that was something that just allowed for me an opportunity to really just examine and look at and think about it in my own life. What does that mean for me as I go through that?
I love that, Jason. That's a great recommendation. And
episode 100, I saved it all for that.
Great, best question, best recommendation. But two thoughts on that. One is, I'm guessing some of us are involved in youth ministries and churches where we hear that constantly. We pray that constantly, and we don't focus on what it actually is. So like you said, let's take the time to teach our kids to focus. So maybe you'll want to walk through some teaching on the Lord's Prayer. I would also guess that many of us are working in churches where our students don't even know the Lord's Prayer. And I think we need to teach that. To me, both those things are a travesty, and we're all guilty of one or the other, I think, and so push on that. Let me thank you folks, Chelsea, Kevin, Kyle, Chris, thanks for setting us up remotely. Jason, as always, thank you. And I'm going to end with this. As we work to navigate this, youth workers, I was struck this morning as I was preparing for this podcast, and we had no idea we were going to have to do this, a couple of weeks ago, that we were going to have this kind of conversation. But I read this morning Jesus and his words in Luke 13, chapter 13, 6-9, the parable of the barren fig tree. And there's so many levels to that, but what really struck me on this was, this tree was not bearing fruit. And as Jesus talked about the person who was being challenged on the health of the tree, the person basically fired back in the parable and says, give me time. Give me time to dig around the roots, to water this thing, to throw some manure in there, some fertilizer, and let's see if this thing will grow some fruit. I wonder sometimes if a crisis like this is a moment for us to think about how well or how poorly we've been at nurturing our kids and helping their roots go down deep. And my challenge to you would be to consider that. Go to Psalm 1, read that, the first few verses where it talks about that and rootedness and depth and getting into God's Word. Youth workers, your job more than anything else, it's not to entertain kids. It's not to have the latest, the greatest, to be stylish, to be relevant. It's to lead kids into the deep, deep truths of God's Word that will sustain them. And as I told my kids this week, when a storm, a physical storm comes through a neighborhood and the winds are high, the trees that blow over and need to be cut up and disposed of are the ones who have shallow roots. And this is a storm, and I just want to encourage everyone to start digging, start fertilizing, start watering your kids, your students, yourselves, to be deeply rooted in the midst of this. So thanks all for joining us, and we may come back and talk more about this. I want you to stay tuned. Our next podcast after this one, we know what it is. We're going to record it in the next 24 hours. Conversation with Dr. Ed Welch about anxiety. He's a guy who's helped me understand this in some deep, deep ways, and we're going to give you the privilege to hear what he has to say so you can pass that on to your families and kids. So thanks for joining us. Again, go to the homepage, cpyu.org, click on the player for this particular podcast, and you'll find all the resources. Chris Wagner will post those. Chris, thank you for your good work on this today. I don't get to see you face-to-face here, but it's nice to see your face virtually. Keep distancing yourself from me. As long as you feel healthy, that's all that matters, right? We want you to feel healthy there. So thanks so much, Chris, for what you've done. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.